Okay, so you want to own a nightclub. Find a room, fill it with a sound system, put someone good behind the decks, and let the city come to you. It's not a bad plan. And if you walk into a busy club at midnight on a Saturday, it looks like the easiest money in the world. There's a queue outside. Every table's taken. The bar is 3 deep, and the card machine hasn't stopped since 11. You look at that and think, this place is printing money. Here's the problem. You are looking at the 2 hours of the week that lie to you the most. Because a nightclub is not an entertainment business. It's a beverage business. And everything you think of as the product, the DJ, the lights, the room, the queue, is the cost of getting people standing close enough to the bar to buy a drink. Once you see it that way, every strange thing about this industry starts to make sense. Why the cover charge barely matters. Why a club with a full dance floor can still be losing money. Why the person who filled the room often isn't on the payroll. And why, in some American states, the single most valuable thing a nightclub owns isn't the building, the sound system, or the brand. It's a piece of paper that lets it sell alcohol. Beverage sales account for 75% or more of total revenue at a typical nightclub. Cover charges, the thing most people assume is the business, rarely make up the largest share of anything, and much of what comes through the door goes straight back out to pay the DJ and the promoters who brought the crowd. So let's start where the money actually starts, not with the music, with what it costs to open the doors at all, because that number is stranger and far more variable than almost anyone expects. There isn't one type of nightclub, there are several, and each is a different business wearing the same lighting rig. At the top, the bottle service venue. Large capacity, premium location, and a revenue model built around a small number of tables spending a lot. Bottle service in a major market typically starts at a $500 to $1,000 minimum spend and climbs steeply from there. A venue like this can take more from 20 tables than from 400 people at the bar. Below that, the mid-market commercial club. Cover charge at the door, a resident DJ, volume across the bar rather than depth at the tables. This is the most common format and the most exposed to competition because there is very little to stop the club 2 streets away doing the same thing slightly cheaper. Then the boutique or underground venue. Smaller room, specific musical identity, a crowd that comes for the programming rather than the night out. Lower capacity ceiling, but far stronger loyalty and much less price sensitivity. Then the bar club hybrid. Operates as a bar from early evening, converts to a club after 11. This one matters more than it sounds, and we'll come back to it, because it solves the single biggest structural problem in the entire business. And finally, the event-led model. The venue itself is almost incidental. The business is a rotating series of promoter-driven nights, each bringing its own crowd. The room is effectively rented out, night by night, to whoever can fill it. Each of these is a different answer to the same question. Do you make your money from a large number of people spending a little, or a small number of people spending a great deal? That single decision determines your capacity requirement, your staffing model, your licensing category, your insurance premium, and how much of your revenue you keep versus hand to someone else. And it determines how much you need before you open. Which brings us to the part where the numbers stop being intuitive. Most people assume the expensive part is the sound system. It's a real cost. Professional-grade club sound starts around $150,000, and this is genuinely not the place to save money. In a venue whose only product is an experience, audio quality is the experience. But it isn't the biggest line. The biggest line is turning an ordinary commercial space into a room that can legally hold several hundred people, at night, drinking, at volume. Nightclub build-out runs around $124 per square foot. Run that on a 5,000 square foot venue, and you're at roughly $620,000 in real estate and renovation before a single light is hung. That figure covers things nobody budgets for at the start. Soundproofing, so the venue doesn't die by noise complaint in month 3. Fire egress and occupancy compliance, because the fire marshal decides your capacity, and your capacity decides your revenue ceiling. Electrical load, because a full lighting rig and a professional PA draw far more than a retail unit was wired for. HVAC, because several hundred people generating heat in a sealed room for 6 hours is a genuine engineering problem. Accessibility, queue management, back-of-house storage. Then the rest of the build. Detailed cost breakdowns for a mid-size club put renovation around $300,000, entertainment and production equipment near $200,000, sound at $150,000, furniture and fit-out around $120,000, and lighting near $100,000. Add licensing, permits, inspections, legal review, opening inventory, and pre-opening payroll, and the typical range to open a nightclub lands somewhere between $250,000 and over $2 million. And that's before working capital. One detailed model puts month 2 cash requirement at around $727,000, with roughly $80,000 tied up in opening liquor inventory alone, and fixed costs running near $53,000 a month from the day the lease starts, whether or not you've opened. Most operators are advised to secure around $1 million in total funding to cover both the build and the first year of operating reality. So far, so expensive. But there's one line item in that list that behaves completely differently from all the others, and in some parts of the United States, it's larger than everything else combined. In most businesses, a license is a fee. You apply, you pay, you get it. Alcohol doesn't work like that. The United States is split into 2 systems. In non-quota states, a liquor license is roughly what you'd expect: an application, a fee, a process. In Wyoming, a license can cost around $1,800. In quota states, California, Florida, New Jersey, and certain New York zones among them, the number of licenses in circulation is capped by law. If the cap is full, you cannot apply for a new one. The only way to get a license is to buy an existing one from somebody who already holds it, on a secondary market. In California, a full on-premises liquor license on that secondary market runs $300,000 to $400,000. Sit with that for a second. The same document costs $1,800 in one state and up to $400,000 in another. And in the second case, it costs more than the entire build-out of a mid-size venue in the first. Which produces a genuinely strange situation. In a quota state, the license isn't a line item on the budget. It is the business. It's a finite, transferable asset with a market price, and it can be worth more than every physical thing in the building. The process is slow too. Nightclub licensing typically takes 6 to 12 months and costs anywhere from $12,000 to over $400,000 depending on jurisdiction. That's 6 to 12 months of paying rent on a room you cannot legally trade from. There's a strategic consequence here that experienced operators understand and first-timers usually don't. Taking over an existing licensed venue can start at $25,000 to $50,000. The build-out is done, the equipment is in place, and critically, the license may transfer with it. A turnkey acquisition in a quota state can be dramatically cheaper than a new build, not because the room is better, but because you're buying the paperwork. And it points at something that runs underneath this entire video. In nightlife, the things that hold value over time, the license, the lease, the premises, are rarely the things the customer sees. The customer sees the DJ, the lights, and the queue. Those are the parts that turn over fastest. Now let's look at how the money actually comes in. Here's where the naive model breaks down completely. Most people assume a nightclub makes its money at the door. It's the most visible transaction, it's the one with a queue attached, and it's the only price advertised on the poster. It's a decoy. The cover charge exists to do 3 jobs: regulate how fast people come in, filter who comes in, and offset the cost of the entertainment. It is not the profit engine. Much of what's collected at the door pays the DJ and the promoters who brought the crowd, and it rarely accounts for the largest share of gross sales. The engine is the bar. Beverage service frequently accounts for 75% or more of total revenue. And the economics of a poured drink are genuinely remarkable. Spirits carry markups of 400% to 500% over wholesale cost. The metric the industry watches is pour cost, the ingredient cost as a percentage of the selling price. And a well-run venue targets 18% to 24% on spirits. Let's work that through, because the number matters more than the percentage. Take a cocktail that costs $2.50 in liquid to make and sells for $14. That's a pour cost of about 18% and a gross margin above 82%. Every one of those drinks contributes roughly $11.50 toward rent, staff, security, insurance, the DJ, and eventually profit. Now scale it. 400 people through the door on a Saturday, averaging 3 drinks each, is 1,200 drinks. At $11.50 of gross margin per drink, that's $13,800 in gross profit from one night's bar service. That is the entire business. Not the door, the bar. Which is also why the physical design of a club is more deliberate than it looks. Bar placement, floor flow, where the queue forms, how far anyone stands from a point of purchase. These aren't aesthetic decisions. In a venue where a dance floor produces no revenue and a bar produces all of it, the ratio between those two areas is one of the most consequential choices in the build. And there's a second revenue stream sitting on top of this one with even stronger economics and a much smaller number of customers. Bottle service is the most profitable segment in a modern nightclub, and it works by extracting a very large amount of revenue from a very small share of the room. The mechanics. A table buys a bottle at a fixed price, well above the equivalent value of the same spirits sold by the glass, in exchange for guaranteed seating, service, and status. Minimum spends in major markets start around $500 to $1,000 and rise steeply for prime tables on prime nights. Here's why it matters so much to the operator. A bottle of spirits, containing roughly 17 1.5-ounce servings, might cost the venue $30 to $40 wholesale. Sold by the glass at $14 a drink, those servings generate around $238. Sold as bottle service, at a $700 minimum spend, the same bottle plus mixers generates several times the wholesale cost in a single transaction, with one order taken, one delivery made, and one table occupied, instead of 17 separate bar interactions. The labor efficiency is the point. Same liquid, a fraction of the service cost, and the revenue is committed up front, rather than accumulated drink by drink over 4 hours. This is why a venue with 20 tables and 400 people on the floor can take more from the 20 tables. And it's why the floor plan of a modern club dedicates so much of its best real estate to seating that most of the room will never use. But there's a catch, and it's the same catch that runs through this entire business. Somebody has to bring those tables in. And increasingly, that somebody doesn't work for the club. This is the part of the nightclub business that has no real equivalent in most industries, and it's worth slowing down for. A promoter is not an employee. They're an independent operator who brings a crowd to your venue on a given night and gets paid a share of what that crowd spends. The rates are substantial. A partnered head promoter is typically paid 20% to 35% of the bar ring, the industry term for total bar takings, including drinks, bottle service, and food. On bottle service specifically, commissions run 10% to 20% of the table spend, excluding tax and tip. And it's common for a promoter deal to include a split of the door, or occasionally the entire door. Sometimes the arrangement is a sliding scale. The higher the bar ring, the higher the percentage the promoter takes. The incentive structure is explicit. Now think about what that means structurally. The club owns the room, the license, the lease, the equipment, and the insurance. It carries the fixed costs 7 days a week, but a meaningful share of its ability to fill that room on any given night sits with people who are not on its payroll, can work with a competitor next month, and take a percentage off the top of the very revenue stream the whole business depends on. It's a rational arrangement for both sides. The venue converts a fixed marketing cost into a variable one and only pays for crowds that actually arrive. The promoter takes on the risk of filling the room in exchange for upside. Neither party is being exploited. But it does mean that the thing a nightclub sells, a room full of the right people, is partly assembled by contractors, and when a promoter leaves, they take the crowd with them, because the crowd was never loyal to the venue in the first place. This is the structural reason nightclub brands are so much weaker than they look. The queue outside is real. The attachment behind it often isn't to the building. Which brings us to a problem baked into the calendar itself. Here is the constraint that shapes nearly every operational decision in this business. Friday and Saturday nights account for around 70% of total weekly foot traffic. Your lease doesn't know that. Your rent is charged for 7 days. Your license is annual. Your insurance is annual. Your loan payments, your equipment finance, your soundproofing, your build-out amortization, all of it is paid across a full calendar, while the great majority of your revenue arrives in roughly 2 windows of 6 hours each. Let's put a number on it. If a venue carries $53,000 a month in fixed costs, that's roughly $1,750 a day, every day, regardless of whether the doors open. Across a month with about 9 trading nights that genuinely matter, each of those nights is carrying close to $5,900 of fixed cost before a single drink is poured. That is the arithmetic behind almost every operational choice you see in a modern venue. It's why clubs push private hire and corporate events on weeknights, because a Tuesday booking is nearly pure contribution against costs already committed. It's why so many venues run the bar-club hybrid model, opening at 6 as a bar to generate any trade at all across the dead middle of the week. And it's why capacity matters so much. In a business where the revenue window is fixed and narrow, the only lever you have on a Saturday is how many people you can legally and safely fit in the room, which is a number set by the fire marshal, not by you. Now, before we get to what breaks, there's a category of cost that almost every first-time operator misjudges, and it has nothing to do with drinks, music, or rent. It's insurance, and specifically, it's what your insurance doesn't cover. A full bar and nightclub insurance program for a single location operation typically runs $14,000 to $37,000 or more per year, with liquor liability alone accounting for $5,000 to $15,000 of that premium. That's the visible part. Here's the part that surprises people. 42 U.S. states plus the District of Columbia have dram shop statutes. Under these laws, a venue can be held financially responsible for harm caused by a customer after they leave the premises. If you serve someone visibly intoxicated or someone underage, and they subsequently injure someone, the liability can attach to your business, not just to them. These are not theoretical. Documented cases include a bar facing $21,000 in defense costs and settlement after a patron caused a road accident, a nightclub hit with a $40,878 judgment after 2 overserved patrons fought, and a restaurant held liable for over $500,000 after inadvertently serving a minor who later crashed a car. And general liability insurance does not cover any of it. Alcohol claims require a separate liquor liability policy. Now the detail that catches even experienced operators. Assault and battery claims, fights between patrons, or incidents involving your own security staff are the second most severe claim category after dram shop. And most general liability carriers either exclude assault and battery entirely or sublimit it to somewhere between $25,000 and $300,000 inside a policy that has a $1 million per occurrence headline limit. So an owner who believes they have $1 million of liability cover may in practice have $100,000 available for the exact category of claim a nightclub is most likely to face. In a serious case, defense costs alone can consume most of that before any settlement is reached. None of this is dramatic on a spreadsheet. It's a line item, but it's a line item that determines whether one bad night ends with an insurance claim or ends the business, and it's decided by a clause most operators never read closely. That's the small version of the lesson. Here's the large one. Nightclubs fail at a rate that would be considered a crisis in almost any other industry. Estimates put nightclub failure rates around 75%, rising to 90% in some markets, and the average lifespan of a nightlife venue is often cited as under 2 years. The sector-level data is starker still. In the UK, the number of bars, clubs, casinos, and similar late-night venues has contracted by 28.9% in the 6 years since March 2020, equivalent to nearly 3 net closures every week for 6 years. Britain's total licensed premises fell 14.3% over the same period, which means late-night venues closed at more than twice the rate of hospitality as a whole. The Nighttime Industries Association calculated that if closures continued at that pace, the last nightclub in Britain would shut on 31 December 2029, a date they named the last night out. It's a campaigning figure rather than a forecast, but the trend underneath it is real. Roughly 37% of UK clubs lost since March 2020, at about 10 closures a month. And this isn't small independents failing while the big operators thrive. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, bar brands including Revolution and Brewdog announced high-profile closures. Here's the important observation, and it's the same one that showed up in the 2-night problem. These venues are not closing because people stopped going out. They're closing because the structure connecting fixed costs, rent, debt, licensing, insurance, compliance, to a narrow and volatile revenue window stopped holding. Add weak consumer confidence, higher operating costs, and changing habits, and the margin that was always thin becomes negative. Because that's the thing about a 7% net margin, which is roughly where high overhead nightclubs sit, at the bottom of the 7% to 12% industry range for bars generally. A 7% margin means a 7% drop in revenue, one quiet quarter, one competitor opening nearby, one licensing dispute, takes you to zero. A full dance floor tells you nothing about whether the structure underneath it can hold. So let's put the whole thing together. Here's the core engine in plain mechanical terms. Beverage revenue, minus pour cost, minus fixed costs, minus everything paid out to the people who filled the room. Let's build a mid-size venue and run it. Fixed costs of $53,000 a month. Rent, payroll, equipment finance, utilities, insurance, licensing, software. That's $636,000 a year before a drink is poured. On the revenue side, 400 people on a Saturday, averaging 3 drinks at $14, is $16,800 in bar takings. At a 20% pour cost, gross profit is around $13,400. Add 10 bottle service tables at an $800 average spend, $8,000, at a similar margin, call it $6,400 gross profit. Friday, at maybe 60% of Saturday's volume, adds roughly $11,900. So a strong weekend generates around $31,700 in gross profit. Across roughly 50 trading weekends, that's about $1.58 million a year in gross profit. Now subtract. Promoter commissions at 25% of bar ring take a substantial share, DJ and talent costs, and note that booking fees for top-tier touring DJs range from $20,000 to over $250,000 per set, which is why most venues run residents at a fraction of that. Security, which for a late-night venue is not optional and not cheap. Marketing, at an industry average around $5,000 a month on social advertising alone. And staff turnover, which in nightlife runs at roughly 75% annually, meaning you are permanently recruiting and training. Run all of that, and a well-managed venue lands in that 7 to 12% net margin band. Call it $110,000 to $190,000 of net profit on a strong year. Now the realistic version, where 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong. A competitor opens 4 streets away and takes 15% of your Saturday. A promoter leaves and takes their crowd. One licensing dispute costs you 6 weekends. A noise complaint forces an early curfew. None of these are exotic. They're the standard risks of this specific business. And any 2 of them together move a 7% margin into a loss, while the queue outside on a good night still looks exactly the same as it did the year before. The difference between those 2 outcomes, in a single mid-size venue, is comfortably over $200,000 in a year, and almost none of it announces itself. So if you do open one, here's the thing worth holding on to. The nightclub business is unusual in that the parts everyone can see, the DJ, the lights, the queue, the name above the door, are the parts that turn over fastest. Clubs are rebranded, relaunched, sold, and closed constantly. The average venue doesn't make it to its 3rd birthday. And the parts nobody sees are the ones that hold value. The lease, the license, the premises. In a quota state, that license can be worth more than everything inside the building, and it doesn't lose value when the club above it fails. It transfers to whoever opens next. That's not a scandal. It's just how the value is distributed in this industry, and it explains something you can observe in any city. The same address hosts 4 different clubs in a decade. The signage changes, the music changes, the crowd changes. The building doesn't. So the real question isn't whether you can fill a room on a Saturday. Almost anyone can fill a room once. It's whether the structure underneath, the lease you signed, the license you hold, the costs you committed to across 7 days for 2 nights of trade, can survive the Tuesdays. Next time, we'll look at a business with the opposite problem. The self-storage unit, where the customer's greatest value to the owner is that they never come back at all.